Finally, starting off with Unit 14, assignment number 1. This is the final unit of the course. This is called Looking Forward on the Internet. First, to get a quick overview of how internet-based data can be used to answer research questions, we read two abstracts that were published in the prestigious journal Science. The first abstract talks about how a famous historical event where the Chicago Tribune published a headline that was very erroneous. It stated that Dewey defeats Truman in the presidential election. This was not true, and the reason that this happened is because they kind of failed to properly poll their audiences. They unintentionally polled like a high amount of Dewey supporters, and so this kind of changed how a lot of polling practices were changed going forwards because they made sure to more randomly sample and to actually get like a good statistical kind of drawing of everyone to make sure that the data that they were gathering like actually represented the truth and wasn't like more biased. The next abstract talks about an event in 1854 when cholera was sweeping the streets of London, and it talks about a figure named John Snow. This guy, he was pretty cool. He recorded the locations of all the homes that had been affected by cholera, and after eventually gathering enough homes, he kind of was able to create like this heat map, and he was able to point out that the water pump must have been the source of the outbreak just by looking at like what houses were affected, and just by considering like how it was flowing through the community, because he could tell just by looking at like what houses had it and what didn't, like that it must have been caused by something that was like obviously only engaging with certain houses and not others, and so he was able to determine that it was actually in the water, which is pretty cool. After that, I was shown 9 different questions and asked to complete one of like their associated activities. These questions were about things like, can Instagram photos provide data about the happiest colleges? Can tweets provide data about heart disease? And can Yelp reviews provide data about foodborne illness? So again, we're kind of looking about like for data collection and seeing, like can little different things that we see on the internet actually be related back to like meaningful data, or is it really just kind of like information that exists and that maybe doesn't necessarily have a greater meaning? After looking at all the article titles, I decided that I wanted to look further into whether or not music app use provided data about emotional engagement. This meant reading an article by Kaneshiro et al. From 2017 titled Characterizing Listener Engagement with Popular Songs Using Large-Scale Music Discovery Data. And then I read Spotify's 2017 blog post, DataViz, Total Eclipse of the Heart Follows the Eclipse. And then finally I watched a GIF of Spotify users playing Total Eclipse of the Heart during the August 2017 total eclipse. For this assignment right away, I was tasked with answering the question. So first off, I was able to say that the article that was provided by Kaneshiro et al. Didn't explore any kind of link between the use of music apps and emotional engagement in particular. Rather, it considered kind of more so how engaged listeners are with certain kinds of popular songs. And while the article does mention at times that people who use apps to identify music, like Shazam, probably have positive feelings towards the songs that they're listening to, I mean, this is only like conjecture, and people can have many different reasons for listening for a certain song. Like I know in my own life, sometimes I listen to songs to like get excited, or maybe if I'm feeling sad, there's a certain song I want to hear. There is like maybe an emotional aspect of wanting to connect with the song, but it's not always necessarily positive, and we can't always confirm that there actually is an emotional connection at all. So it's kind of hard to say there. And then going off the other reading, which was a blog post from Spotify about the increased rate of people listening to the song Total Eclipse of the Heart by Bonnie Tyler during an eclipse. It took place in 2017. It was seeming like this was more related to emotional engagement, as it kind of suggested that people listened to the song just because they were more excited about the phenomenon. People listened to the song more as the eclipse actually approached their area, and most people listened to the song multiple times throughout the day. And this was actually shown pretty well in the GIF that was sent by the professor as well. It's basically like this kind of map where it shows like where the actual eclipse could be seen from in America, and where like the like I guess the streams of the song actually like peak throughout the day. And it's kind of crazy how you see it fade like perfectly across the United States from west to east coast. It's so like perfectly in line that it's actually really interesting to see, because you could tell that a lot of people are definitely listening to it like as it's probably moving over them just to kind of like have fun and listen to this song, which I thought was cool. And then finally, to answer the question of why I decided to answer this question, um, I mean, the same reason really that I've looked into any of the other music questions throughout this class. I would consider myself a music fan, and when I saw the music talk about like Spotify and, like Bonnie Tyler or whatever, I just thought that was interesting. Um, I'm just, I like to learn about music, even if it's kind of loosely related and it's more about emotional contagion. I still have fun with that, and I like to engage in that kind of content. So I figured I'd look into this reading more. For me, though, that was everything that I had for assignment number 1. Assignment number 2 started off pretty strong. Right away, we read about a prediction that Nikola Tesla made about wireless communication in the future, and he actually made this prediction back in 1926. And he originally said that we shall be able to communicate with one another instantly, irrespective of distance. Not only this, but through television and telephony, we shall see and hear one another as perfectly as though we were face to face, despite intervening distances of thousands of miles. And the instruments through which we shall be able to do this will be amazingly simple compared with our present telephone. A man will be able to carry one in his vest pocket. And this prediction is just so insanely incredible because, now almost 100 years later, everything about this is completely 100% accurate. We really do have cell phones that, they're just so small and like they hide their mechanism so well. Like it's just a simple interface. You tap on a screen and you're able to talk to anyone, anywhere in the world. And it is like truly mostly perfect. If you have a good enough connection to your internet or your data or whatnot, you really can talk to someone in such a sense that, it's just the quality is absurd, So this prediction was like amazingly spot on. I was kind of interested and blown away that this was real, honestly, because it's just so perfect. Next, I watched an interview of a man named Arthur C. Clarke, where he also tried to predict the future of like wireless communication back from 1976. He actually also made quite a few predictions, and most of them came true. One of which was his idea that the machine of the future would have access to like many different kind of tools. Like it could be a TV, it could be used to kind of secure airline flights or to like find prices of like different products. Um, and these are all definitely things that we could do on like our cell phones and our computers today. So he was very correct in that sense that we'd be able to kind of like reach out and tap into markets and different like communities to kind of manage resources. He does make some predictions that are not entirely correct though. Like he talks about how in the future we might have to consider like abolishing time zones completely and like work on a common time. It's possible, obviously, that this could happen in the future, but as of right now, like 50 years later, this is kind of like almost to like I don't know. It's such a crazy idea. Like it's not something that I think anyone would ever really consider at this current point in time. It's pretty out there, so I would say that that was not a super accurate like prediction of his. But a lot of the other stuff that he said was pretty good, I would say. Next up, I read an article by Wired Magazine from 2018 titled 25 years ago, AT&T predicted the future we're living now. And I watched the related compilation of AT&T television advertisements that were created in 1993 and were titled You Will. And these commercials were actually pretty interesting. They tried to predict that people would be able to watch movies wherever like they wanted or whatever kind of movies they wanted. And this is something like that we have today now with streaming, so they were pretty accurate on that point. They also talked about how like you wouldn't need to record it or like catch it live or anything. You could just kind of like want it and have it, and that's absolutely something that we have today. There are some things that they try to predict though that aren't necessarily accurate though. Like in one of their commercials, AT&T has a scene where a woman, her hands are full and she's trying to get through the door into her apartment, and she does like basically like a vocal kind of like call, like she just talks and then the door is able to like recognize her voice and open. And in a sense, we do have like certain bits of like vocal recognition today. Like anytime you talk to like an like an assistant, like a smart assistant, like something like Siri or Alexa, you might see it like listen for a specific voice to give us it like a specific reaction. But generally, this kind of technology is not super widespread, and we don't use it very often. So this kind of prediction was not incredibly accurate, you could say. Then, though, I went on to read excerpts of Douglas Adams' essay, How to Stop Worrying and Learn to Love the Internet, which was written in 1999. And this reading was just kind of more so like to kind of a comical approach, and it kind of shares the idea that like just because something comes along in the time like when we're born, like after when we're born, doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be like afraid of it, or just because like we have an easier time accepting things that have been around for a long time, but just because something is new doesn't necessarily mean that like we have to be afraid of it. And it took kind of more a comical approach by talking about how like just because like anything that gets invented between when you're born and when you're 30 is exciting and interesting and fun, and then once you turn 30, like everything that's invented is like scary and like weird and unnatural, just kind of making fun out of it. Then next there was an abstract of Protzko and Schooler's research article from 2023 titled "What I Didn't Grow Up With Is Dangerous: Personal Experience with New Technology or Societal Change Reduces the Belief That It Corrupts Youth." And then there was another reading that we went through as well, an abstract of Smiley and Fisher's 2022 research article, which mentions that the golden age, or I should say the article is titled "The Golden Age is Behind Us, How the Status Quo Impacts the Evaluation of Technology." And both of these articles kind of dive back into the idea of, just because something is new, you know, doesn't necessarily mean it like corrupts the youth or ruins society. New just means, it's not old, really. It's like there's just nothing to really be afraid of a lot of the time. And it is kind of natural, I would say, to be afraid of things that we don't fully understand. But I mean, just sometimes the lengths that we go to, or like the lies that we kind of tell ourselves about what we need to be afraid of and what we don't need to be afraid of, is just kind of ridiculous. And it's at times like these that we really need to try and be more like objective and, think about like things in a more intelligent sense and realize that, maybe it's new, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is bad. Finally, we read through the Pessimist Archives 2021 comic strip about the history of moral panics regarding tech and past times. We watched Steve Jobs introduce the iPhone in 2007 as well. And actually, during his talk, he predicted that he was going to make some history. And he was quite correct because, I mean, you think about the legacy of the iPhone and like just the cell phone in general, and it's so big today, and it's changed so much over time, and it really has evolved. And that really was like a kind of history that was made in that day. And then finally, after going through all those readings, I was tasked with going to the discussion board for this assignment and making a post in which I identified from above like 5 previous predictions that did eventually come true. And I also made sure to include the dates of each of those predictions of when they were made and like the names of the people making them. And then after that, I made 3 actual future predictions of my own about the future of the internet. So just talking about some that came true, and I already mentioned some of these, but I mean, Nikola Tesla predicted in 1926 that we'd be able to communicate instantly with each other, which we practically can through texting. In 1976, Arthur Clarke made many predictions, most of which came true, and one of those was that the machine of the future would have access to TV, airline flights, prices of items at stores, and more. And this is actually something that we could definitely do on the internet, looking at all these things pretty easily and just engaging with all these different sort of resources and researching different things. And then in 1993, the telecommunications company AT&T predicted that people would be able to watch whatever movies they want, like on their own TV, without needing to record it before, catch it live. And these are absolutely things that we can do today. We can kind of stream things just whenever we want. It's not even a matter of recording it, It's just almost always available, assuming that it's on the appropriate platform. And then in 1995, Eric Schmidt from the NBC News video predicted that all businesses, small or large, will be on the internet. And today we could see that most businesses do have some kind of a website to interact with online. And if they don't, it's usually kind of seen as like strange. We almost expect it nowadays. I know whenever I'm like looking up a restaurant or something and there's not any kind of like menu to look at or whatever online, that always frustrates me beforehand, knowing that like the only way to get that information is to actually go in person. And then finally, in 1999, Douglas Adams predicted that the internet would be used to connect people, unlike past technologies such as the radio and the television. These didn't have much of an interactive element to them. They were kind of one-sided. You could put something in and broadcast it out, but the internet was one of the first real examples of where lots of people could talk to lots of other people, and it was kind of this big web that was just spanned amongst like the whole kind of population. And he really believed that because people do generally like to talk to each other, that the internet would be a great communication tool because it would allow people everywhere to like talk with a bunch of different people all over. And then I followed this up with 3 of my own predictions about the future of the internet. I started by saying that I think that streaming will become less popular, like streaming of movies, and in exchange, something closer to what we consider like cable television today will become more popular, just like a bundled way of having everything all together. Just because streaming has become such a problem in recent times, the way that like different content moves across platforms, and I mean, it could be so hard to kind of like track what you actually want and to find out where it is. And it just feels really unsatisfying in its current state because it feels like everything is always like split a million different ways, and it's just such a hassle. And then I also said that I think that videos and photos will keep getting higher resolutions and faster frame rates, even though we're already kind of getting close to a point where the human eye can't really take in more like visual information. Like we can't really make pictures look nicer than they already do just because it's about limitations with like human biology rather than technology. But I still think we're going to be getting like deeper colors and televisions and sharper images and more pixels just because it'll sell more regardless of whether or not maybe it's actually something that like the human body can actually perceive. And then finally I said that as the internet becomes more capable of transferring mass amounts of data at once, I don't think we're going to always have to have things like installed like files or movies or video games in order to actually like view them. I think we'll be able to just like rapidly download them and then engage with them how we want to, and then once we're done we could just like delete them. So it'll be more of a process of like not needing as much like storage space just because we'll be able to like rapidly call it from like a database somewhere whenever we need it. Yeah, but after that, I'm done with all of assignment 2, having made my predictions and talking about the other ones that were made in the past. Now, this assignment 3 was actually a pretty unique one. The purpose of this assignment was to give everyone a chance to redo a past assignment that they had done and not gotten full credit on. This was actually pretty nice because I had a couple, like a few little handfuls of assignments that I had gotten like 2 out of 3s on. But there was one and only one where I just wasn't able to really recorrect it the right way the first time around. So it was sitting as like a 1 out of 3 in my grade book, and I didn't have any 0 out of 3s. I only had this 1 out of 3, and it was totally bothering me for like the entirety of the course. So this was really cool because it was a chance for me to go back and redo that assignment and then get the full credit for it. So that was really nice. I really appreciated that. But anyways, that was all I really had to do for assignment 3. Just some kind of little like paperwork stuff about what assignment I wanted redid and what I got wrong the first time and whatnot. Assignment number 4 was also an interesting one. This was the time to turn in the term project. This was kind of also a matter of just reading over the fine print and making sure, to understand all the small details about, making sure that you're uploading your like presentation or maybe your Pinterest board or whatever it is that you made the correct way and getting it all uploaded correctly to the site. This is actually the only assignment that, as of this recording, I have not yet done. So I'm definitely going to look forward to doing that once I finish everything up. But yeah, this was kind of cool to finally see that this is where the final presentation is going. We do all this work for this course, and it's kind of cool to have like this like climax right at the end where we finally see it all come together and we are able to submit it and put it all away. Super satisfying. So that was cool to see. But yeah, I haven't actually done that yet. I'll make sure to go back to do that though once I finish this recording. But then looking at assignment number 5, for this they were just asking us to look at the student course evaluations for the course. We got the links in our emails. I made sure to do those as soon as I got them. I always try to provide some kind of decent feedback because I know that a lot of professors do appreciate that. So, just going in there and really kind of giving information about how I felt about the course and how I felt about the content and what kind of changes, if any, I thought could be made. But yeah, I mean, those are never too hard to do. I kind of appreciate being able to give the feedback and sort of reflect on what the class meant for everyone. And I mean, the 3 points that were given for free on this assignment, that's pretty cool. I don't mind that at all either, so that was nice. I made sure to go to the Unit 14 Assignment 5 discussion board and just type in a simple comment about how I completed my student course evaluation in order to get my credit for this one. But yeah, that was all for assignment number 5. And then moving on to assignment number 6, finally we have our last bit of course review. For this one, I finally, I went back and I wrote in the answers for all the previous 13 units. Within, going to unit number 14, I had to identify at least one way that secondary data can be mined from the internet, like from Facebook likes, tweets, Wikipedia clicks, and more, to answer a research question. And I responded by saying that tweets can be used as qualitative data to determine how certain people feel about certain topics. For example, people who post tweets about their political opinions are telling the world what their political views are, and that this information could be used by psychologists to, determine how people with certain political opinions communicate online. After this, I had to identify 3 previous predictions about the internet made decades ago that have come true. I first started by saying that Nikola Tesla predicted in 1926 that we would be able to communicate instantly with each other, and we can practically do this now thanks to texting and calling. And then in 1993, AT&T predicted that people would be able to watch whatever movies they wanted on their TV without needing to record it beforehand or catch it live. And we can totally do this now thanks to streaming. And then finally, again, I talked about how in 1995, Eric Schmidt from the NBC News video predicted that all businesses, small or large, will be on the internet to some extent. And today we could totally see this, as most businesses have some kind of website that usually like advertises their services or like gives their location or just talks about them generally. They might also have some kind of app component, or they'll even just be like present on Google Maps. Like they'll literally have like a basic presence there. And then finally, the very last thing for course review, I had to identify 3 predictions that I have about the future of the internet. And I just talked about what I said earlier about how I think streaming will kind of be condensed into like a big package like cable is, just to sort of reduce the amount of frustration that people have about the shifts that happen to streaming platforms. And then I talked about how photos and videos are keep getting like upgrading and improving and getting higher resolutions and frame rates and colors, even though really these things aren't going to be very noticeable for the average person. It's just going to be something to kind of create a selling point. And then finally, I said that as the internet becomes more capable of transferring mass amounts of data, I think that it's going to be less common to see us like install things at all. I think it's going to be more so a matter of like you just like call to a server that you want like a certain movie or a video game, and then it will rapidly like either maybe stream it to you or like install it on your device like almost instantaneously. And then you can watch your thing or play your game or whatever, and then once you're done, it will delete it from like your hardware. And then if you ever want to go back to it again, it's just a matter of kind of calling it back from that like server base. So really, it's not going to be about having much installed or having personal devices with a lot of like storage space on them, because you just won't need it if you're only ever working with like 1 or 2 programs at a time. That was the last real bit of work though I had to do for this course. There was a little more stuff we had to do that was kind of more so about walking back down memory lane. But first, I took a look back at the first page of the course syllabus in the section titled "What Will I Learn in this Course?", where there was listed the 14 different learning objectives. And basically, by successfully completing the Unit 14 course review sheet, I effectively demonstrated that I achieved like successfully all of the 14 different kind of learning objectives tied to this course, which was super satisfying to see, being able to look back on what I've done and how it like really kind of related to what we said would be accomplished in this course. And then finally, I went to the Unit 14 assignment number 6 page, which was just an assignment link, and I clicked on the upload button to attach my Unit 14 course review, and I submitted that. That was my second to last submission, I guess. I still haven't actually put in my final project, which I'm looking forward to doing. But then finally, the very last thing, I read through the American Psychological Association's list of skills that employers value, which lists the 17 skills that successful psychology majors should acquire. And this was just done because during this course, we have actually developed these skills. We've worked on a lot of them. We've worked on all of them really. And that was just super cool to see, like another kind of full circle moment, getting to really put that all together and saying that we accomplished that and worked on that was super cool. But otherwise, with that being said, that is the end of Psych 532. That is all the content that the course offered. That was all the work that I did for this course. That was everything. It was super cool to be able to sit down and talk about it. And I don't think I've ever really had a class that kind of afforded me this opportunity. So I'm glad that I was able to do this, and I'm glad that I was able to talk about these things again. And it was a super cool moment. But otherwise, that's all I have to say. And I'm appreciative that I was able to do all this. And I wish whoever's listening to this the best in the future. But otherwise, that's it. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the best.